now? What's the date, man?
I think it's the 14th.
Is it the 14th?
I think so.
It's the 14th. I know y'all usually just.
Wednesday.
It is Wednesday. It's Wednesday. We know it's Wednesday. Hey, we got some guests here. Y'all don't know. You all have no clue who this is, do you? I'm like real stoked right now. I'm kind of like fanboying over here right now on the inside parts right now because we have the famous, all right, the indescribable, all right, Chris Ann, JC Hall. I'm sorry, I got to put the man first. JC and Chris Ann Hall. I'm so sorry. I know from the JC and Chris Ann Hall show, they switched it up a bit, right?
I thought you were talking about.
I'm definitely talking about you,
the
sir.
Chris Ann Hall show. I'm just letting him be on there.
Oh, okay. She runs things. You know,
The guy in the sidecar.
yeah.
It's like she's driving a motorcycle. I'm just in the little sidecar, just along for the ride. She lets me rant every now and
Yeah,
then.
his rants are awesome. Like, if you guys don't know who this is, you know, they're definitely an advocate for the Constitution, stand up for the Constitution. They're lovely people. Like, they're in our house right now. Down to earth. They're really down to earth, and we're glad to have you all here today.
It's your house.
Yeah.
Hey, y'all
live in the house too?
Yeah, we live in a house.
Yeah, so, you know, you see how down to earth that is? What kind of answer is that? You know, we live in a house too. You guys live in a house. It's all good.
I know we live in a spaceship.
We're better than you.
We moved out of this bitch.
But yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome to have these lovely individuals here today. We just had a little dinner, so now we're
Well,
gonna.
we're thankful that you cooked for us. Your wife.
My wife, yeah, to get there.
No,
Yeah,
it's
we're
so
gonna
very
fix that up because I didn't do it.
You made the rice.
They probably be. I did
You
make
made
the
the
rice. I did. Oh, that was the rice. Pretty good. All right, so yeah, we
That's
did.
cold. Oh, that's cold.
Oh yeah. Cool guy. Yeah, watch out for him. You know, I heard he got a dead eye. That's a dead eye.
Yeah.
So man, y'all's
Hilarious.
YouTube videos are blowing up, man.
Oh yeah. You know, you ain't say something like that. Yeah, something like
Want to
that.
blow YouTube up.
Yeah, I know. This is going on their platform.
Nobody's
Chill out.
saying
Chill
that
out.
now.
Chill
Yeah, I
out.
know, right?
You've been Maxine Waters saying kind of threat against YouTube.
Exactly.
Yeah, but definitely again, we're
It's not
glad to have you guys here, and we just wanted to kind of because a lot of people don't understand how important the Constitution is, you know. And we know you guys' platform, you guys kind of segue into talking about the Constitution a lot. It's kind of where your focus is, it seems. And a lot of people that may view our platform, they really don't understand the importance of it. And a lot of times we get stuck into the echo chamber of politics so much that we really don't understand and comprehend exactly what this country is all about, and exactly what our founding fathers would expect from us, as Americans. So we just kind of want to lay that platform here on our platform and kind of move forward, because we do. When we first started, we kind of were just straight up, like we said, Obama all day. That's all we cared about. We didn't care anything about learning about the Constitution, about learning about the other side.
Black.
But what is? I mean, yeah, that kind of is all interchangeable.
What was the trigger? So I'm gonna flip this on you. So
Flip it on me. You gonna
So what woke you up? Like, was there a moment? Or
It was definitely a moment for us. I mean, we 2016, I'll say the 2016 election, we actually start trying to do a little research. Once it came around the time doing the primaries.
Knowledge is a dangerous thing.
It is. It's very dangerous because the death threats follow. Once we actually start doing our own research.
You started learning stuff they didn't want you to know.
Exactly. So I started
Now
looking
you
into.
know why they keep you dumb in school.
I know. It was the school system. I blame the school system, indoctrination centers. But
Chris Ann started back on around 2009, and then ended up being fired for teaching the Constitution from the prosecutor's office in Florida.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
So but I was sort of in your shoes as well. I was a hardcore socialist, atheist. I believed that in big government. I thought government was supposed to be our caretaker. Government was supposed to do everything, and the rich people had to take care of other people. That's what this was all about. And I didn't have a turning point. I had like a sanctification process.
Oh, wow.
So I was raised my whole life in a home where the only thing more evil than Satan himself was a Republican.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. So
sounds like you grew up right down the road with us.
I know. But we were a hardworking family, and I went to college. I put myself through college. I had a couple jobs, student loans, the whole thing. I graduated with a degree in biochemistry. I got a job, and I'm working, and I'm looking at my paycheck, and I'm thinking, all right, this taxes thing, right? It's fair. Because that's what taxes are about. They're about being fair, right?
Yeah, that's
And
fair share.
You're paying your
You
fair share,
as
right?
a citizen, you're doing your due
You have to
diligence.
help people that can't help this. It's all about fairness. And I started thinking, now wait a minute, fair. What does that actually mean? Wouldn't fair mean I worked hard, I sacrificed for 4 years, I put myself in debt to make a better way of life for myself, and I'm looking at my paycheck and I'm thinking all these taxes are going to pay for the lives of these people who weren't working when I started college and still not working. Still not working. And it's not because they're disabled. It's not because they're orphans or widows. It's because they don't want to. And I thought, no,
Not fair.
fair. That is not fair. Because fair means I work hard, I get what I work for, right? Then had a family, and I realized that it doesn't take Hillary Clinton to raise my child, right? Because she's not there with the diapers and the vomits. And when my child grows up, they're not going to look at my child and say, wow, you had a really bad government.
You had a bad village.
Yeah, right. You had a bad village. And be like, your parents stunk, right? So it's a reflection on me. The government. So I'm like, wait a minute now. This is really starting to flip on me. And then I told you I was an atheist. I gave my life to Christ, and I realized the real Savior, the real provider, the real protector. He's not the thumb in the strong arm of some person in power, but a loving Father who wants to help me to be a help to other people. And so that's the whole process. And then I got fired.
That's a nice end of the story there, right?
Yeah.
You were an attorney.
Well,
you are an attorney.
I am an attorney. But here's
So
the
she
thing.
knows what she's talking about, all right? So don't just think that she's just a random person here, all right? Got accolades here.
Here's the thing.
What's your constitutional awakening?
Yeah, my constitutional awakening took place in law school when I realized we don't teach the Constitution in law school. Did you guys know that?
I did not know that. I thought that's what they were going there for.
No. We don't know. Law schools don't teach the Constitution.
Don't teach the Constitution.
I graduated from the University of Florida in the top 50 in the country. And I graduated 300 in my class. And I bet you 95% of them could tell you they never even looked at the Constitution. Their entire law school.
Wow.
We teach in law school, we teach something called constitutional law, which is the opposite of the Constitution.
So it's not the same thing.
No, constitutional law teaches that judges and lawyers know more about the Constitution than the men who wrote it. And then we spend the rest of our law school and our careers learning how to circumvent the Constitution so we can win our argument, because it's not about defending and preserving the Constitution. It's about winning, right? So I started reading about the founders, and I really just fell in love with them. I read a book called The Founding Brothers by Joseph Ellis, and then I read a book called 1776 by David McCullough, and I just thought to myself, I have to know more about these people. So I started reading, and I had some friends in law school. They call themselves the Federalists. And so I started hanging out with them because I had this interest, right? And I started reading the Federalist Papers. I started reading the notes in the debates. I started reading the letters that they wrote with each other, which is really kind of cool because it's like eavesdropping. It's like reading somebody else's text messages and emails, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're
It's
writing to
documented.
each other. And some of them, oh my goodness, they're hilarious. Alexander Hamilton's not my favorite founding father, but he had such a snarky, biting kind of sense of humor. He could put somebody down. It was hilarious. And then I started to realize that the Constitution as we know it today, the Constitution as they teach it today, doesn't even remotely resemble the Constitution as it was intended to be used. And then I had to put aside all of this stuff that I'd been taught, that the Constitution made people property, that the Constitution said that slaves or black men were 3/5 of a person. I had to put aside this idea that the federal government is supreme over everything, that judges are the ultimate rulers of the universe. You know, I had to put all that aside because the people who actually wrote the Constitution specifically told us otherwise.
Exactly.
Right.
And then I started getting mad. I did. I got mad because I had all these stupid professors telling me in law school, your whole career, oh, you can't possibly know what the founders intended when they wrote this.
Right.
My goodness, they're dead.
Yeah,
How did you
The one said,
know?
it's not like we have a crystal ball.
Yeah,
Like, no, but you have a mountain of papers as high as a telephone pole that they wrote.
they wrote
That's
reams
right.
and reams and reams.
Right.
Millions of times they intended. So it is either a willful ignorance, a deliberate ignorance, or a deliberate deception. Because the truth is out there and it's easy to find, especially in this day and age where everything is 3 seconds. Google it, right? Google it. It's right there. Now, I try to put forward the Founders Papers, the Federalist Papers, and all that. Now I get people, well, that's somebody rewrote that. They didn't write that.
Really? You get that? That's the talking point.
Yeah.
They didn't write that. Wow.
No.
Well, on the level that we experience, like people that know us, we get a lot of talking points that would say, "Hey, well, those, you can't believe that the Constitution was written for us. That was a document that was written by the white man for the white man. What would you say to that?
That's when you send them the link to that.
Yeah, well, but you know what? In all honesty, they can't hardly help but believe that because that's what they teach in the schools. I mean, Frederick Douglass believed that.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
Frederick Douglass believed that until he did his own research.
Exactly.
And he did what you did. He got the knowledge of the real history and the real words.
Well, and I was taking it even further. He did, not him, but he was affected by someone doing what you're doing. So Frederick Douglass was actually, intercepted by Lysander Spooner, because now Douglass and Garrison were together. And Garrison's whole philosophy was that the Constitution was a slave document. It promoted slavery. And so you had Lysander Spooner basically come to Douglass and say, hey, man, let me tell you some stuff. And then Douglass began this investigation on his own. Listen, Lysander Spooner said, I'm going to read this for myself. I mean, Frederick Douglass is probably one of the smartest men we've ever had in America, one of the greatest orators that ever lived.
Especially in his day.
Yeah, in any day. I mean, he started studying this on his own and came to the conclusion and made the argument the rest of his life that the Constitution is a freedom document. It's an anti-slave document. And basically his message was, and especially his really the symphony of his entire writing, his entire career, the speech that he gave in 1852, what to the Negro is your 4th of July, or what to the slave is your 4th of July, right? Yeah. So his magnum opus symphony speech. Say he worked in one letter. He says he worked on writing this speech for 3 weeks. But he basically, that encapsulates his argument from that transformation, was that no, the Constitution doesn't promote slavery. The Constitution is an anti-slave document. The Constitution embodies, the pinnacle of the principles of liberty. The problem is America at that time, their hypocrisy. It wasn't, let's throw out the Constitution, I hate the Constitution. It was, the Constitution ought to be our standard. Our problem is we're not living up to it. So when you see that speech, because this is bad, I see this, you probably encounter this. So every 4th of July now, I see this section out of Douglass's speech of 1852. And the message that you get is, man, Douglass hated the Constitution. I ought to hate the Constitution too, because they ain't got nothing to do with me, a black man, right? That's the message. And I kept hearing that, and that's what launched me into a study of Douglass, because I had seen some other stuff, and I said, this doesn't seem to add up. So I looked at it myself, and I found out it really is so deceptive and so wicked. There's a part in the speech where Douglass is saying, the argument is being made that the Constitution is a slave document. It's this, and he says all these bad things, right, which is what they highlight. Then at the end of that, what's not included in the meme, he says, but I don't hold that point of view. And then he begins to talk about why your founders were great statesmen who made great sacrifice. I respect them. I can't say anything bad about them. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution are great documents. They're documents of liberty. They're anti-slave documents.
He says the men who wrote it are to be honored and
Right.
and revered and for their vision of freedom and liberty and that's what
And
we're
then
missing.
he basically, at the end of that speech, it's kind of sort of a three-part where he builds this thing, just a masterpiece. And then at the end is where he hits them. He brags on all the ideals. He brags on the Constitution. He brags on the founders. He says how righteous they are. And then that's when he drops the hammer. And he says, so why aren't you living up to this? And that's when he says basically, look at the scenario we have. In fact, this is your celebration, your America, your declaration, your Constitution, your ideals, because you're not letting me be included in this. So it was about the hypocrisy. So really, Frederick Douglass's message is the same message that we are all trying to share today. It's not the Constitution that's the problem. The problem is we're not living up to it and not following it. So there's no difference in the two messages. And it's very sad for me, and it's dishonoring to the legacy of Frederick Douglass when people take his word and try to twist them to really what he pointed to as this is the hope. This is the hope to fix this. Follow the principles that are in these documents and we'll be fine. And
basically what he was doing was pointing to like the argument that was being made, or a point that was being made, and they're taking that as
his statement.
Right. And so it's sad. His speech was not an anti-Constitution speech, anti-America speech. If anything, I would say it's an anti-hypocrisy speech. It's live up to the standards, and that's what we're saying. You look at the so-called conservative movement, whatever you want to call it. I like to say liberty movement, because conservative has kind of different meanings.
Yeah.
But in the liberty movement, that's our message. You got the leftists and the statists. Everybody's talking about how flawed the Constitution. These are bad principles because it's rooted in racism. It's rooted in slavery. It's just not so. If this is what's crazy. So they're in this meme, they're holding up Frederick Douglass. Like, it's okay, here's an example. Here's somebody we should look to. And, so we should listen to his words. Okay, well, if you're going to listen to his words, then he's not saying what you're saying. He's not saying throw out the Constitution. He's not saying Constitution is bad. He's saying live up to it, follow it. That's what we're saying. So we agree with Frederick Douglass here. And so the people making these memes, they're not agreeing with Frederick Douglass. Maybe they think they are, but they're not. And that's the key of what Chrisanne does in teaching the constitutional history, the American history. If you have a firm grasp on history, ignorance can't stand. It can't find lodging in your mind, right? The only reason people can take this meme and share this meme is because they're ignorant of the true history. And it's just like Chrisanne said earlier, in half a second, you can go find this online. You can read the whole thing. You can see what it says.
And that's what trips me out too, because we talk to a lot of people, and then another big one that they go to, a point that they go to is, well, the Constitution itself said that, and you pointed that out, that black people, 3/5 of them, they did it, and then.
Well, but that's not what the Constitution says.
Exactly.
And again, it's like I said, it's a willful ignorance or a willful deception. It can't be, it's either one. Because the truth is out there. It's out there in writing. It's not hidden. It's not in some cave or a Dead Sea Scroll or something. It's right out there. You can read it. And the basic, simple truth is, first off, nobody is called 3/5 of a person anywhere in the Constitution. It had to do with taxation. It had to do with representation. Now, it's really, really, really cool how they did this. It was almost genius. So what you have states that are required to fund the federal government for the federal government's authorized duties, right? But you also have people in those states who want to have representation in government so that they can have control over government, right? So if you have states right now, because at the time of the writing of the Constitution, some of the states still had slaves. Now remember, there's a sunset to the slave trade, and the slave trade is moving out, right? Even in the slave states, there are freedom pockets, and it's being pushed out, right? It's dying out. How do you make sure that the slave states don't get undue influence in government through a elevated representation, right? So you have a portion of the slave states who are people who are not free, so they can't vote. Now, the slave owners wanted to count these slaves for representation, so that
give them
but not give them the right to vote. So the slave owner would actually have the vote of however many slaves he owned, right? So you have an exaggerated population count for representation, which would give the slave states greater influence in the federal government. But taxation is not supposed to come out of your pocket. It's not supposed to come out of mine. Direct taxation, income tax, is an illegal concept according to our Constitution. Taxes from the federal to pay the federal debt were supposed to come from the states through apportionment, and that meant not individuals. So apportionment meant you take the census every 10 years. You find out the population of that state. Then the percentage of the national debt is paid by the percentage of population. So states with more people had a greater debt to pay than the states with less people. So there's a conflicting interest there, isn't there? So you want to have more people so you get greater representation. But you want to have less people so you don't have to pay as much, right? So they linked taxation and representation to the census together, right? So now they can't lie to not pay, and they can't lie to have an exaggerated thing. But now we have a problem, because we still have the slave owners who will not allow their slaves to vote. Now I just want to slip in something right there. There were free black men that voted. That held office. That, we know that, right? Your audience knows this. Okay, so you still have slave owners that won't allow their slaves to vote. How do you make sure that they're being honest in the census and that they're not getting an exaggerated influence? Well, you have to make a compromise, right? Because there's another problem that we have to deal with. How do we make sure that the slave states actually join the Union? Because if they don't join the Union, there will never be a pressure for them to end slavery. Then what you have is like Europe. So we have the United States of America, and then we have South Carolina, its own country. And then we have to do business with South Carolina as a foreign country right in our borders, right, that are going to be doing slave trading right in there. But if we can get them into the Union where we know slave trade is going to sunset, where the other states will be able to economically and culturally pressure them to push out the slavery, you do it by compromise. You say, okay, if you agree to come into the Union, and you don't stay out your own country, make war with us, make trouble with us, that sort of thing. You come into our union, you abide by the terms. Here's what we'll do. We'll allow you to account 3/5 of your slave population for voting purposes. Now, you still have to pay your taxes based on that 3/5 amount, but then you get representation for that 3/5 amount.
So that actually reduced the influence, reduced the representative power of the slave states. So it was a way to weaken their influence. So in fact, when somebody said, when you hear somebody say, "Oh, 3/5," okay, so you didn't want to be 3/5, you wanted to be
One?
whole,
you wanted the slave owners to have all that?
So what you're saying is you wanted the slave owners to have increased power and representation. So it's the opposite of what the propaganda is and what they say it is. And by the way, as far as the Constitution never said a slave was property. That was the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court.
But here's the thing that will really tie this all together for you, right? So the payment of the debt based on apportionment, based on the census, right? Okay, so you have people being counted. You don't have horses being counted.
Exactly.
You don't have buggies and carts being counted, right?
Property, yeah.
Right? So from the get-go, and this is not me making this up, this is actually taken from their debates. They specifically said that slaves are not property because they are to be counted. The fact that they are to be counted eliminates the possibility of them being property.
Yeah.
Which is that's what Douglass, I mean, it was some of Douglass's argument when he railed against Dred Scott in the North Star. I mean, after his conversion, his shift,
The Dred Scott case, not Dred Scott
right after
himself.
the Dred Scott case, but after
yeah.
Douglass's conversion, and realizing this is an anti-slave document. I mean, he was so political. He was writing nonstop, publishing nonstop, and that was one of those arguments like, hey, we got this through Fifth Clause, you got this. How are you saying they're property when, and he's going through it. And so his argument was not against the Constitution. Once again, he said, this is a Supreme Court that is misinterpreting the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't say that. This wicked court is who said that.
Yeah.
And so here we are, right? So the same people that's arguing all this nonsense are going to be the ones to say, oh, you got to follow the Obamacare mandate because the Supreme Court says so. It's the law of the land, right? Once again, in complete contradiction to Frederick Douglass's argument. So it's become one of my pursuits in studying Douglass and these things, because you've seen the video I do. So my heritage on my father's side is African slaves, so I got to researching this stuff and got on Douglass, and it's crazy to me how all these people, try to make these arguments and are totally 180 degrees from where Douglass was and what he was arguing, and which is sad. I mean, what are you trying to say? You smarter than Frederick Douglass?
Exactly.
I mean, come on, give me a break.
That's what's so funny, man. I'm like,
That's why I say you're smart. They always say that to me, Christine. You think you're smarter than the Supreme Court? Okay, maybe. I may be not be smarter, but I am better informed.
Exactly. And it's funny because like this stuff has happened before. Like you always say, I mean, and so it becomes to the point where it's like, okay, it's like you said, willful ignorance at that point.
Absolutely.
It's like they went through this stuff. So
Like the
nothing new.
representation thing. You got people that's arguing that these are the same people that think that every vote they don't look at the representation side like each vote is
Exactly.
The national popular vote, one person, one vote.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's where in places like where we live, you're done. You have no other voice. You throw out the electoral college, okay, and you go to that national popular vote, then you're ruled by all these urban centers, the big cities. So everybody just may as well move to New York and LA and Chicago, because that's who's dictating everything in the nation. Okay.
And that's not liberty.
No, you're right.
That is not liberty. That is actually slavery. That is the rule of the majority, and that's how slavery gets hold. When the majority can rule over the minority, then you have slavery. That's how slavery happens. We are not a democracy because we're not the majority ruled by the minority. We're a constitutional republic where everyone has equal representation regardless of their socioeconomic background, regardless of the money they have or the power they have. Everybody has an equal voice through the creation of laws. Democracy is nothing more than a kingdom of 4,000.
And really our founders had kind of a view of regionalism. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, it's going to be different over here, different over there. So, I mean, I don't care. You want to do whatever you want to do in the city. I don't care.
Yeah.
But why you got to tell me what to do?
Exactly.
Why you got to come out here? I mean,
we don't live like that.
Yeah.
We don't live like you.
That's
okay, because you like living like that, and it takes those lines. I'm good for
I don't want to tell LA what to do. I don't want to tell San Francisco what to do. But the liberals' problem, they won't tell us what to do. In the rural areas and non-urban areas. I mean, not that everybody in the urban area is liberal, but that seemed like where they dominate. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
So liberty, we talk about the definition of liberty. Basically, you have the right to do whatever you want with whatever is yours, as long as you don't harm another.
Exactly.
That's liberty. And so
I have a mathematical equation.
Okay, let's do math.
I don't do that, man.
No, it's simple.
Okay.
Liberty equals freedom plus morality.
Liberty equals freedom.
Freedom plus morality. You have the freedom to do whatever you want, but you must govern yourself and not harm another.
So not a, and to be clear, because we're talking about liberty, not a forced morality, not somebody else, not somebody's religion
That's why I said
forced on you.
self-governance.
But that morality of do no harm.
Right.
You know, that my liberty ends at the end of my nose kind of idea that, you know, your stuff is yours, what you do is yours, and you can do whatever you want with it as long as you're not harming somebody else. I'm not harming you. You know, so that's the morality of it, which from my point of view as a former pastor, as a preacher, is the gospel. I mean, the core of liberty is in the scripture. Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." That's liberty. You know,
Exactly.
and there's a sense of if you're seeing someone being violated, have their liberty violated, right? If you're going to love your neighbor as yourself, you're going to intervene, or you're not going to tolerate that. So I can't watch my neighbor having their liberty stolen and sit silent and say, that's not my problem.
Oh, well, I
because then I'm not loving my neighbor as myself.
But I voted.
What's that question again?
Liberty equals freedom plus morality.
Now, you think the founding fathers, you think they understood that concept, like they had that idea?
Okay, so Benjamin Franklin wrote in 1722, when he was 16 years old, that liberty should know no bounds other than you cannot harm or control the right of another. That is the basic
what about
principle
the Sam Adams quote? Sam Adams gives the definition almost precisely, the knowledge.
Oh, yeah. Sam Adams said, no people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved.
Right.
He said,
So
but on the
there's that
contrary,
virtue part.
he said, on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders.
And do we see that happening now?
So we are our own enemy.
Exactly.
We are our own enemy. Washington, D.C. is a greater threat to the liberty of the American people than a caravan coming through Mexico or ISIS trying to bomb the towers.
That's true. That is true.
We've lost more liberty at the hands of federal politicians than we have from any invasion.
Now, going back to
the politicians or is it the people?
Well, that's the politicians are the symptom of the problem.
The people
The problem is, as Samuel Adams said, the ignorance of the people and the immorality in their lack of self-governance. See, the less you govern yourself, the more the government needs to govern over you.
Exactly.
Right?
They're going to take over the federal. They're going to take over and give it to you. Yeah, we're going to take
Well, that's why parents are so important, right? Parents are so important because when you're 4, they take you to the woodshed so that when you're 44, the government doesn't have to, right? Not publicly.
beach kids.
And I say we like living out here because you know.
Because you can beat your kids.
Beach kids.
Hey, Slatter, I'm trying to be a captain.
Oh,
Okay, I got it.
I missed the Kaepernick thing before.
Oh, kneeling, I got it.
I missed the point. On that topic too, there are a lot of people that say there are people that will make the argument as well that I know you gave that equation there, but they'll say so. Well, how can you bring morality into the conversation when these men own slaves and they look down on black people or whatever? So I mean, what would you say?
Yeah,
Which men?
The founding fathers.
Which founding fathers? Because John Jay and Alexander Hamilton were abolitionists. George Washington was an abolitionist. Thomas Jefferson was an abolitionist. Thomas Jefferson was one of the strongest abolitionists. John Jay and Alexander the earliest, right?
Jefferson is probably the biggest enigma. He's probably the one with the most problems. So when you look at the arc of his life, you're going to go, what's going on? How did you get here? So because initially, it's big abolitionist, and then you see, although there's different nuances to this thing, but again, it goes back to
cultural and legal issues that you had to deal with in that day. But you got John Jay and Alexander Hamilton creating the Free African School and the
New York
Manumission Society. We have at Liberty First University, we have a course called Slavery and the America's Founders, where we actually read through their writings about how they drafted the Declaration and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as an abolitionist document. Most people don't realize, historically speaking, the colonies, when we were still colonies, tried to stop slavery. They tried to outlaw it. But the British government was forcing slavery because that was a huge commerce for them, right? And so when Virginia was one of the colonies that had actually outlawed slavery, and the British government threatened the colony of Virginia with military force and economic sanctions that if they did this. And our founders talked about this. Jefferson talked about it. George Mason talked about how it was forced on us. So our Declaration of Independence was the only way we could end slavery, was to break free from Great Britain. So that's how that had to happen.
I was going to say follow JC Hall Global on Instagram, and I'll show you. You'll find I got this stuff on there, the memes and everything. I mean, like you mentioned, George Washington. George Washington was 11 years old when he inherited the slaves. Right,
What's an 11-year-old going to do with that?
What does he know about that?
You said inherited.
And so when you begin to look at his writings and actually study the history and not just something somebody tells you, you will see as he grew to understand the issue and understand the problem and evolve. You know, he's like, nobody was more against this than me, and nothing I wish more to see this thing ended and get out of this. He was a real reserved kind of guy. He's not out and just, bulldogging things. And
Patrick
so, so it's a nuanced and complicated thing. But she mentioned like John Jay, Alexander Hamilton were two that founded the New York Manumission Society that then established the Africa Free School. Several of you saw my presentation about the Black founding fathers and mothers prior to Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Many of those people that I named were actually products of the Africa Free School that was started by John Jay. John Jay and Alexander Hamilton. John Adams never owned slaves. He was not a slaveholder. Madison makes some of the strongest anti-slavery statements that you will find. It's unbelievable. And this is a crazy thing. When I would share with people, I always share the quotes. Like when I start the conversation, I share the quotes by themselves. I don't say, well, James Madison said, right? I bring the quote and I say, man, this, and it'd be some strong anti-slavery quote, and I say, don't you agree with that, man? Isn't that good? What a good quote, good, powerful. And then I'll be like, that was James Madison.
That's smart.
And then I go, whoa, wait a minute, because it short circuits this propaganda, this miseducation, I should say, that they have in their mind. And I heard this other day. A guy just released an autobiography of Frederick Douglass, and I was listening.
You were listening on NPR.
I was listening to him. Yeah, I think it was this morning. I heard this guy, and in the interview, what was interesting to me in the interview, because like I said, you've seen my presentation, right? The thing's called More Than Victims, and run through all of these Black founding fathers and mothers, Black Americans, patriots in the Revolutionary War, business owners, entrepreneurs, restaurateurs, real estate magnates. I mean, on and on and on. And if you recall, several of them, I don't know if I made it really clear, but several of them were sons or daughters of slaves, right? They were never actually slaves. They were free Blacks, right?
Well,
because one of them, for instance,
Wentworth Cheswell his father was free.
Yeah. So some of those guys, right? So some of the Black Americans would be slaves. They fight in the Revolutionary War. They gain their slavery. Their children were not slaves. So I'm listening to this guy on the interview. Now he's a professor. He's doing this history of Frederick Douglass, and it sounds really good, and he sounds very knowledgeable, and he's on target. And then this lady's asking him questions, and they were talking about, like, it had callers, and caller called in and said, the lady, you stumbled when saying white people own Black people. You just need to say that, because that's the truth. And she said, well, I was just struggling with the reality of it. And this guy says, yeah, you got to think that, every Black person had this experience, and they would think back to when they were owned by a white man. And this is the professor. And it was like, not every Black person was a slave.
Well, and one of the callers called in and said, how can you use the term abolitionist when referring to a Black person? Because they were slaves. They couldn't have been abolitionists.
He said all Black people were abolitionists. He said you shouldn't use the term abolitionist for a white person. He said, all the black people were always against slavery. How can you call a white person an abolitionist? I mean, so really twisted. This is a kind of twisted thinking. When you, and that's the thing. This is the thing what I say in that presentation. When you sever Black America from their history, then that's when you can pick up these anti-American. All of a sudden, you've made an entire population hate their country and believe they're separated from the history. It's not my history. It's white people's history. All I was a slave. If you actually know that history, I mean, I don't know how many are in that presentation that I gave. Maybe 2 dozen. Right? And there's so many more. Right, the books that I'm using as researchers have hundreds.
The professor had a national audience. All he had to say was, "Well, you realize not all black people were
simple
slaves."
answer. Yeah, not everybody.
And he didn't even do that. He could have brought up the fact that the first legal case that made slaves that transferred slaves from being indentured servants to permanent slaves was actually a black property owner who had a slave he did not want to let go.
So a black man
owning a black man was sued by his slave. Here's what happened. He had this slave, and at that time, now this is British history, this is not American history, this is prior to our independence. Slavery was an indentured servitude thing. There was not a permanent institution of slavery. You were born and died in slavery. So you worked your time till you paid off whatever your debt was, and then you were free. Well, this guy, the slave owner, Anthony Johnson, was not allowing his slave to go free. So his neighbor bought him and set him free. Well, Anthony Johnson said, "No, you can't do that. He's my slave," and sued his neighbor for setting the slave free. And the court is the one who said he could be permanent. He could be a permanent slave for the rest of his life. Once again, the judge is doing that. This is a black man trying to keep another black man in permanent servitude, and that's where we began.
So
the institution of permanent slavery.
But that's the problem here. You know, you hear the story, like what all we learn in school and in popular media is this nice, clean narrative. You know, 1619, slaves showed up. And then it's slavery, and then 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. We're free, and then Civil Rights Movement. Yeah. The real history is so much more complex than that, right?
Yeah. Very complex.
There were
just as complex as the individual people involved.
Yeah. So there were black people that were not slaves. There were black slave owners, white slave owners. There were black Americans who were incredibly successful and influential in spite of the circumstances. There were black Americans who were absolutely brutalized, murdered, beat to death in slavery. So there's all of this, the whole spectrum of nuance. And what I see today, the propaganda tries to take away nuance, right? Take away all these details. And this is where it's dangerous. This is where I see the danger rising today. The twisting of the history and the controlling of this poisonous narrative is basically making us focus on all of the things that are different about us. It's almost as if everything that we have or could have in common is being destroyed. This is why I was really disappointed. Like, I respect, Kaepernick, the whole Colin Kaepernick. I respect the idea of him looking at a legitimate problem and wanting to do something about it, okay? But let me tell you what I thought is very dangerous and misguided in this thing is him choosing the flag and drawing the flag into this. And I know, I mean, first he just sat and refused, right? And then apparently had a military guy that said, that's going to be perceived as disrespectful. You should probably kneel, right? The military guy was off his rocker because that's going to be a problem too, right? So bad advice doesn't make it better. Exactly. And this is when it hit me. I was watching, I think it was ESPN Basketball Love Story, right? Which I love. That's one of my first loves, basketball. I'm watching this, and it goes back to what they called the Redeem Team, right? When LeBron first went there, and then they totally blew it, got destroyed by Argentina. Then the next year, Coach K took over, Jerry Colangelo, and they're going to fix this thing. And then they got the Redeem team, and they went over, man, and they kicked butt, and they were standing there. And you can see these guys standing with pride.
Oh,
and the flag came down, and you saw these guys hand over the heart and salute stuff. And I thought, I wonder what they would do today. You couldn't do that today. And that's when it hit me. What do we have anymore that actually connects us? So Kaepernick inadvertently attacked this thing that we used to be connected when it was pride and country in America. If we don't have that anymore, what do we have? And if we've lost our common bonds and now it's all about our differences, I don't think we fully comprehend what kind of incredibly dangerous country we are creating and passing on to our children when we are eliminating every single bond that connects us. It is. It is, and it's not just a political thing. It's not just a political disagreement. This is a precursor to the absolute destruction of the fabric of society. That is. I don't know that we fully grasp the danger of where we're of these things.
Thomas Paine said, "It's not in numbers that we gather our strength, but in unity." And that's what we're missing. For me, there's two dangers in this false narrative of the Constitution's a document of slavery, and every black man was a slave. So there's two dangers. The first danger is what I think is the most obvious one. It teaches an entire culture in America that they're worthless. Your foundation was slavery. You're nothing more than a slave. There's nothing more than you can be than a slave. You have extracted a history from a people, and a beautiful, a powerful, a inspirational history. When you think of people like Wentworth Cheswell, when you think about people like Crispus Attucks and Lafayette,
James Lafayette,
right? These people are heroes that had circumstances, oh my goodness, much worse than anybody in America has today, and they made amazing things out of it, right? That is the history that we ought to be teaching. You are not, like he says, it's more than victims. You are not a victim, for goodness sakes. You are a conqueror, right? Against all odds. And so the first thing is that it teaches a generation of people that they don't even need to try. Why do I need to try? There's no point in trying because I have a bad history. My heritage is against me. My whole place, everything's against me. And
systematic oppression.
Yeah, right, systematic. And plus, then somebody else is going to take care of me anyway. Oh yeah, right. Right. So I don't even try. Then the other dangerous thing ties into his. So now you have a whole culture of people who hate their own country. Who hate it. It's not just a matter of lacking of unity. They despise it. They want to see it torn down. They want to see it destroyed. But what they don't realize is that they're calling for the reinstitution of their own slavery. And both of these situations that I've given you are the reinstitution of their own slavery, because when you no longer are in control of your own life and your own destiny, you are enslaved to whoever takes care of you. And then when you hate your own country, you have no unity with somebody else, and it's the government that holds you together. I disagree. It's not that we don't have a unity, we have a wrong unity. We're all supposed to be unified under the government. That is totalitarianism. That is not liberty, and that's why this is dangerous.
Very much so.
The two responses, I get a couple of responses that are just sad and frustrating. So the one on one level, you're denying slavery. Like, so when I teach the successful, influential, impactful, heroes prior to Emancipation Proclamation, black founding fathers, they're like, oh, you're denying slavery. No, that's already taught. I'm trying to add back into the narrative history that's been erased. And then the other response is, you present all this, well, Trump this and Trump said that. I'm not talking about Trump. We're talking about you.
We don't even mention Trump in our classes. Yeah, because you know what? Trump was born when? Because if you weren't born before 1812, I probably don't even
probably
remember
not
your name
talking about
anyway.
you.
So
Exactly.
I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about you. This is why what you guys are doing is so important. And I think what your message is to the people out there, there's one important thing you can do. Just look for yourself.
Yeah.
For yourself.
Just
That's true.
read it yourself.
That's true.
Stop being dictated the narrative to. And inside of us, we all have an inner spirit of rebellion.
Oh yeah.
All of us do. You just have to realize that you're being led around by falsehoods and lies. It's hard to talk about that today because the whole idea of fake news has been so popularized and stigmatized and stuff. But this is the real thing. You can read. You are an intelligent being. You have a mind that works. Don't be lazy. Look for yourself. All of this stuff is out there. I'm not here. JC's not here. These fine, handsome men are not here to tell you what to think. We're here to show you how to think for yourself.
To think.
For yourself. I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but there's a quote that floats around for a long time that Harriet Beecher Stowe, she said that I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if they'd actually even known they were slaves. I don't know if she actually said that, but it's still Harriet Tubman. Oh, I said Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Tubman.
Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Uncle Tom, yeah. So
you wanted to call us Uncle Tom's on the table, right?
Yeah. That's a compliment.
It's a compliment, right?
Again,
don't realize that.
JC Hall Global.
Got you.
I just posted the real Uncle Tom, who is
Matthew.
I'm not gonna give it away. Go look it up.
Check him out.
JC is a great place to start, but if you want to start thinking beyond 140 characters or less, if you want to start thinking beyond a meme, go to chrisannhall.com. Go to our YouTube channel. Get educated. I mean, everything is there, and it's not like I'm trying to teach you. Your schools have told you what to think for too long. It's time for you to think on your own.
Joe, you know what I like. You know what I like to say. What I like to ask them.
Go ahead.
Is it working for you?
That's
right. Is what you know and think you know and believe. Is it working for you? Right. I mean, you got people running around in this stuff and spouting this and that. And how's it working for you?
How's it working?
You look at these communities following these ideas now for decades. How's it working? I mean, what's the risk of looking at something different? Thinking in a different way, try it out. You know, I went to.
Your professor might not like you so much.
Yeah, we went to the
politician might not like you so much.
We went to the Center for Urban Renewal and Education's National Policy Summit in DC not too long ago. There were 300 Black ministers from all over the country, mostly urban areas. I mean, Chicago, LA, I mean,
New Orleans,
all over, man. And not all of them, you know, it wasn't like a bunch of Republicans and I'm conservative, whatever, but a good portion of them said, you know what, we've been trying these things and these other guys been feeding us all these times and we're looking around in our communities and it's not working. So it's not a matter of, hey, we're here to change parties or we're looking for some political thing. We're looking for new ideas and new solutions that are going to help us. And so we want to hear what you have to say. And so there were a lot of people there, man, and it was a great forum. And a great gathering, and we got to share these ideas. Here's some principles, and here's some things and ways to think about things and approaches, ways to do things. That's not just, hey, you know, I'm going to promise you these programs, and as long as you vote for me, and then vanish, right? And then they vanish, and you don't see anything. So why not try something else? You know, so that's what I always hit them with. Is it working?
That's true. Because I mean, like I always say, we get stuck in this little echo chamber of, you know, fighting Democrat versus Republican or conservative versus liberal, right versus left. But we forget oftentimes the truth behind things and what we actually should stand for as Americans, you know, as a unit, as being Americans. So once we get back to that, I think we'll actually be able to make some headway. But until then, we're just going to be going back and forth fighting.
Do you know what my motto is? Liberty over security.
Oh, I want you to end with that. That's, you know, yeah, go ahead.
Liberty over security, principle over party, and truth over your favorite personality.
That's perfect. It's lovely. It's lovely. Y'all get the saying right, you know. Yeah, it's deep. That's deep, and that's true because we do choose those things in the other order most times,
Exactly.
and we get
What
caught
would be
up.
so wrong within the next election that we chose people based on the character rather than the color of their politics?
True.
Right?
Like
Are you
Martin Luther King
red
said.
or blue? You know, a red wave, blue wave. How about we talk about your character?
Your character.
How about we talk about your qualifications?
Exactly.
I'm not looking for a color wave. I'm looking for a liberty wave. That's what I'm interested
The colors get confusing. We had, what was it, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she even said we want a red wave. The colors get confusing sometimes. You don't even know our own colors. We don't know the colors anymore.
just
We're confused.
Well, she's got lots
thinking-
of problems.
She's thinking Soviet red.
Exactly.
That's a different
And
color.
that's another big danger. And I feel like
That's 1950 red.
That's 1950 red, right? Yeah, definitely. I think we're in
So
danger.
do
I think
we
we're in
do
danger.
everything you want to
I think we pretty much got everything. What you think, Hayes?
Because we can go back and do this again sometime.
Oh, we gonna have to go see you guys.
Come to Florida. You can come
We got to go back them 2 miles. We got to go
JC
back.
built me an awesome studio in the barn, and
Really?
we can come hang out.
You guys
at the
doing it
studio.
big, yeah. We're gonna have to come hang out. One last time, you guys plug, I guess your social media outlets or whatever.
Well, we have a radio show called the Chris Ann Hall Show, Monday through Thursday and on Saturdays.
Yeah, go to SoundCloud, look for Chris Ann Hall Show, and click your little heart there.
Yeah.
Follow us.
We're on YouTube, which is also Chris Ann Hall,
Yeah.
and we need you to like and
Ring
to
the bell.
ring the Liberty Bell.
know,
Our son taught us about that. Ring my bell. Oh no, I don't.
Gotta hit that bell though.
ChrisAnnHall.com.
ChrisAnnHall.com. It's KrisAnnehall.com. And then we have LibertyFirstUniversity.com. Liberty First, because there is a Liberty University, but we're LibertyFirstUniversity.com.
Yeah.
And I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on Facebook. All my name.
I'm on Instagram only, so don't look for me anywhere else.
You're on Twitter. So you're on Twitter.
I don't use Twitter. I have a Twitter
Cesspool.
account. I have a Facebook account. I do not use them. I don't even look at them.
It's all good. We know you just go to
So
Instagram.
just go to Instagram.
But I do have a phone. I have a phone and email. I mean, if you're a human being and you want to talk for real, see, I'm old school, man. I am old school. Like, you want to talk to me? Pick up the phone and call me. I don't.
Yeah, so like, can we do an interview? Can we have him? Like, all right, well, we'll come over.
Yeah, just
They're
come
like,
over.
no, we're gonna.
Oh my God.
We want to see you.
Yeah, but this is awesome, man. We appreciate it once again. Liberty First University is definitely awesome. We got to get on that. We've been slacking ourselves, but we definitely got to get on that because the education. Yeah, we're gonna work on that. The education is there though. Like the things that they teach are things that a lot of us don't even hear. Like what we just went over is something that y'all probably don't even hear on a regular basis. So it's good.
And we do it every day on the radio show.
We do it every day on the radio show.
Every day.
Go check out the radio show.
And then JC gets to rant.
Ah,
Best part.
y'all thought this guy was good at ranting?
That's the rant.
We need to have like, yeah, we need to have like a rant competition between these two. I'm pretty sure he'd be the last man standing.
You just the stage, man. I'm a grumpy old man now. That's how you do that.
Get it out.
It's a grumpy old man vibe.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, you just take some.
You gotta get a little more age on you. Got a little more gray hairs. Yeah, you'll be okay. Get more gray hairs.
All right.
Definitely, once again, we appreciate it. You guys know where you can find us. It's all good.
Exactly.
You know, you hear where you can find them. Any more engagements lined up? Maybe next month in the beginning of the year that you guys
We'll be in
at?
Florida a lot next month.
But you can go to chrisannhall.com/calendar and you can see us for the next year. You can even search by your state to see if I'm going to be in where you are.
Well, sign up.
You want to sign up? You guys have a sign up? You don't have a sign up? I guess we'll sign out the way we sign up. Continue to fight for the Constitution, people.
With these, so that hopefully
Practically.
we never have to use these. Peace.